Obi-Wan Kenobi has always been remembered as the steady center of the prequel era, the calm voice in rooms filled with fear, ego, and desperation. But that reputation often obscures a quieter truth about who he really is and why he survived so long inside a collapsing system. He is not blind, he is not naive, and he is not untouched by doubt. By the time the Clone Wars erupt, Obi-Wan has buried more questions than most Jedi ever allow themselves to ask. And the loss of Qui-Gon Jinn leaves a vacuum that the Council never truly fills. That absence matters, because Qui-Gon was the one figure Obi-Wan trusted to challenge orthodoxy without abandoning compassion. And when that voice is gone, the cracks do not vanish. They simply stop being spoken aloud. Dooku understands this kind of silence better than almost anyone. As a former Jedi Master, he does not approach Obi-Wan as a predator sensing weakness, but as a philosopher recognizing unfinished thought. He would never tempt Obi-Wan with promises of power, dominion, or revenge, because Obi-Wan has never been motivated by hunger for control. Instead, Dooku would speak to the exhaustion that comes from years of compromise, from watching ideals diluted by procedure, and from realizing that obedience has quietly replaced wisdom at the heart of the Jedi Order. That is a far more dangerous appeal, because it does not feel like corruption. It feels like clarity. After Qui-Gon's death on Naboo, Obi-Wan is elevated faster than he is allowed to grieve, and the Council treats that transition as proof of resilience, rather than a warning sign. They reward composure without asking what it costs, and they mistake emotional restraint for enlightenment. Obi-Wan learns very quickly that there is no space within the Order to process doubt openly, no room to acknowledge that the Jedi way may be failing the very people it claims to serve. Every time the Council defers to the Republic's politics, every time nuance is sacrificed for stability, Obi-Wan notices, and each time he says nothing, the weight accumulates. Dooku's critique of the Republic would resonate with Obi-Wan precisely because it aligns with what he has already observed firsthand. Corruption is not an abstract concept to Obi-Wan. It is something he has seen on Mandalore, on Geonosis, and in the Senate chambers of Coruscant, where suffering is debated like a budget line. Dooku does not need to exaggerate these flaws. He only needs to name them honestly. For Obi-Wan, hearing those truths spoken aloud by someone who once stood where he stands now would feel less like seduction and more like relief. Unlike Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan is not ruled by volcanic emotion, and that distinction is crucial. He would not be pulled toward Dooku by rage, grief, or a desire to be special, but by the slow erosion of faith in an institution that refuses to examine itself. Obi-Wan believes in responsibility, in accountability, and in the moral obligation to act when systems cause harm, and over time, the Jedi Council's refusal to confront its own complicity becomes impossible to ignore. Dooku's arguments would not inflame Obi-Wan. They would simply connect dots he has already been tracing in silence. What makes this potential choice so unsettling is that it would not register as betrayal in Obi-Wan's own mind. He has never sworn loyalty to the Jedi as an organization, only to the principles he believed they embodied, principles that now feel increasingly absent. Aligning with Dooku would feel like choosing truth over comfort, integrity over tradition, and honesty over ritual. Obi-Wan would not see himself as leaving the Jedi, but as refusing to lie for them any longer. There is also the matter of Qui-Gon's legacy, which the Council quietly sidelines after his death. Qui-Gon believed the Jedi had lost their way long before the Clone Wars, and Obi-Wan knows this, even if he struggles to reconcile it with his own devotion. Dooku was Qui-Gon's master, and that shared lineage carries weight, not as nostalgia, but as philosophical continuity. In many ways, Dooku represents the path Qui-Gon might have taken had he lived long enough to see the Republic's rot fully exposed, and that parallel would be impossible for Obi-Wan to ignore. Obi-Wan's sense of duty has always been directed outward, toward the galaxy rather than toward Jedi politics, and that orientation makes him vulnerable to Dooku's framing. When Dooku speaks of liberating systems from a corrupt republic rather than conquering them, Obi-Wan hears echoes of the Jedi's original mandate. The idea that the Order has become an instrument of stagnation rather than balance would not feel radical to him. It would feel tragically plausible. At that point, staying becomes harder to justify than leaving. There is also a profound loneliness in being the only one who seems willing to acknowledge these truths. Obi-Wan watches other Jedi double down on dogma as the war escalates, mistaking rigidity for strength. And the more they harden, the more isolated he feels. Dooku offers not camaraderie, but understanding. And sometimes that is enough. Being seen, truly seen, after years of self-suppression, can feel like stepping into open air after a long confinement. Crucially, Dooku never asks Obi-Wan to abandon compassion, only to redirect it. He reframes the conflict not as Jedi versus Sith, but as conscience versus complacency, and that reframing aligns disturbingly well with Obi-Wan's lived experience. The Jedi's insistence on neutrality in the face of systemic injustice begins to look less like wisdom and more like abdication. In that light, walking away does not feel like falling. It feels like standing up. Obi-Wan's defining trait has always been moral seriousness, not blind faith, and once that faith fractures, it cannot simply be patched over by tradition. The more the Council insists that obedience is the path to peace, the more Obi-Wan recognizes that peace without truth is just silence enforced at scale. Dooku's willingness to say what the Jedi refuse to confront becomes the final crack that turns doubt into decision. Not a dramatic rupture, but a quiet, irreversible shift. This is why the idea of Obi-Wan joining Dooku is so unsettling, because it is not a story of corruption, but of clarity arrived at too late. It is the tragedy of a good man realizing that the institution he served no longer serves the good, and that realization carries consequences far beyond personal loyalty. And once that first step is taken, once truth is chosen over tradition, the galaxy does not simply change direction. It begins to unravel in ways no one is prepared for. Once Obi-Wan steps away from the Jedi Order, the damage is not immediate, but it is unmistakable, like a pressure seal, failing slowly, rather than explosively. His departure does not arrive with theatrics or denunciations, but with an absence that everyone feels, and no one can quite explain away. For the Separatists, his presence becomes something far more powerful than another general or strategist, because Obi-Wan Kenobi is living proof that dissent within the Jedi is not a Sith fabrication. He is credibility given form, and that changes everything. To the galaxy at large, Obi-Wan's alignment with Dooku reframes the conflict overnight. The separatist movement is no longer dismissed as a coalition of disgruntled corporations and ambitious warlords, because now one of the Republic's most respected Jedi stands among them without theatrics or cruelty. His calm demeanour, his refusal to indulge in rhetoric, and his visible discomfort with violence signal that this is not a power grab, but a moral rupture. Systems that were previously undecided begin to listen more closely, not because they agree, but because they can no longer pretend the Jedi Order is unified or infallible. This is where the schism becomes philosophical rather than political. Obi-Wan does not preach rebellion. He speaks about responsibility, about the cost of pretending stability is the same as justice, and about the danger of institutions that refuse introspection. Those words carry weight precisely because they come from someone who embodied Jedi restraint for decades. The Republic finds itself unable to counter these arguments without exposing its own contradictions, and every attempt to dismiss Obi-Wan as misguided only reinforces the sense that something fundamental has gone wrong. Within the Jedi Order, the reaction is not grief, but fear disguised as certainty. Obi-Wan's choice forces them to confront the possibility that dissent does not automatically equate to darkness, and rather than engage with that possibility, they retreat further into dogma. The Council tightens doctrine, discourages questioning, and emphasizes obedience with renewed urgency, believing unity can be enforced if it cannot be earned. In doing so, they unknowingly validate every criticism Dooku ever leveled against them, and the irony is not lost on those watching from the outside. Anakin Skywalker feels the impact more acutely than anyone else, because Obi-Wan was never just his master, he was his anchor. Without Obi-Wan's steady presence, Anakin loses the one figure who could challenge him without judgment and restrain him without humiliation. The Council tries to fill that void with authority and surveillance, but authority without trust only sharpens Anakin's resentment. Obi-Wan's absence does not cause Anakin's fall on its own, but it removes the last stabilizing force capable of slowing it. What makes this unraveling so tragic is that Obi-Wan does not actively manipulate events to Yikan to what may bring it about. He does not encourage defections, he does not undermine the Republic militarily, and he does not weaponize his former relationships. He simply refuses to lie, and in a galaxy built on convenient illusions, that refusal is destabilizing enough. Every speech he gives, every negotiation he participates in, exposes how brittle the existing order really is. The Separatists themselves are changed by Obi-Wan's presence in ways Dooku may not have fully anticipated. His insistence on restraint, on civilian protection, and on accountability creates friction within a movement that has grown comfortable with expedience. Some leaders resent him for it. Others quietly adjust their strategies to avoid his scrutiny, but all of them recognize that the mask of ideological purity can no longer hide moral shortcuts. The rebellion gains legitimacy, but it also gains conscience, and that tension reshapes its internal dynamics. Meanwhile, the Republic's propaganda machine strains under the weight of contradiction. It cannot paint Obi-Wan as a monster without undermining years of celebrating him as a hero, and it cannot acknowledge his sincerity without validating the separatist cause. This paralysis leads to increasingly hollow messaging, which the public senses even if it cannot articulate why. Trust erodes not because of a single betrayal, but because the story no longer matches observable reality. The Jedi Council's response to this erosion is to retreat into ritual and precedent, doubling down on the very behaviours that drove Obi-Wan away. They interpret criticism as threat, reflection as weakness, and dissent as contamination, and in doing so, they accelerate their own isolation. Younger Jedi notice this, even if they lack the language to challenge it, and seeds of doubt spread quietly through the Order. The Jedi do not fracture all at once, but the cracks multiply, and each one traces back to the same refusal to listen. Obi-Wan watches this from a distance with a grief that never fully leaves him. He does not celebrate the chaos, and he does not believe himself vindicated by the galaxy's suffering. His choice was never about winning, but about refusing to participate in a lie, and the cost of that refusal weighs heavily on him. Yet even in regret, he does not turn back, because turning back would require pretending that nothing has been learned, and that is a step he cannot take. As the war intensifies, events spiral faster than anyone anticipated, because the moral centre that once slowed escalation has been removed. Decisions are made with less hesitation, compromises are justified with greater ease, and the line between necessity and cruelty blurs more quickly. Obi-Wan does not save the galaxy by leaving the Jedi, but he exposes the truth that it was never as stable as it claimed to be. Once exposed, collapse becomes a matter of timing rather than possibility. In the end, this version of history is not defined by a single fall to darkness, but by the failure of institutions to adapt when confronted with their own flaws. Obi-Wan's choice does not create evil, it reveals it, and revelation is often more destructive than conquest. The tragedy is not that the galaxy breaks, but that it breaks because too many people mistook silence for peace and tradition for virtue, and by the time that mistake is understood, there is no version of events left where everything holds together.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.